first of all, Andrew, let me say I'm so pleased to be speaking with you today. I've been aware of your work since at least The Hidden Journey. Uh,
Wow, that's a long time, 30
ma-
years. Yes.
yes, many years ago. And right up to the present, before I contacted you, I started reading The Magdalene Revolution. So hopefully we'll have a chance to say a little bit about that
Oh, yes,
because
absolutely. How did you like it?
I'm about halfway through it and I'm loving it. It's honestly a transformative experience
Oh, please say that. Tell
reading it.
everybody to buy it on pain of karmic horror, and they'll come back as cockroaches if they don't buy
I
it.
will I will let them know. So it's
It was a hell of a book to write. I nearly died writing it, but I'm so happy it's out.
well, congratulations. And maybe toward the end of the interview we'll say a little more about that. But the our main
Yes.
reason for talking today is our mutual beloved friend Dorothy Walters, because we're doing an issue on poetry and I wanted to feature some of her poems. And I know I met Dorothy, well, I encountered Dorothy through her book, Unmasking the Rose, years ago.
Great
When,
book. I edited that book with her. Yes.
oh, did you? Oh, yes.
Yes.
Well, that book had a profound impact on me, and partly because I had had a very powerful Kundalini awakening, and her book really helped me understand what had happened. Then, some years later, when the spiritual community I was a part of collapsed, I called Dorothy and we started a friendship because she helped me understand, which I now I think have fully embraced, that my entire spiritual path since that Kundalini awakening was guided and fueled by Kundalini. In your book,
Changes
I don't,
everything, doesn't it? It
yes,
takes you away from the external supports and you rely upon the goddess herself. Yes.
exactly. That's exactly true. I noticed that Dorothy's work was spread all over the place. Her books were published by different publishers and her poetry was all over the internet. And so I started to talk to her about gathering. I wanted to try to publish all of her books in one place because I felt that would help them have a life, beyond hers, of course.
Absolutely. It's essential. Yes.
And so I've done that, and I got to I got to spend some years in relationship with her before she passed. And so I would love to know how did you meet Dorothy first? How did your relationship with her start?
Well, it's a wonderful story. I was 41 or 42, and I was invited to the California Institute of Integral Studies, and I gave a very wild, over the top, under the bottom class on Rumi, and it became a kind of phenomenon. And I used to see this very sweet, very humble person sitting at the top of the class, and sometimes she had tears streaming down her face. And eventually I had an office hours, and she came in and she said, well, I'm a poet and I've written some poems secretly, quietly, and I would love it if you would do me the honor of reading them. And to be perfectly honest, my heart sank a million miles because if you knew how many dreadful poems I'd been given to be polite about over the years, you would have great sympathy upon my soul. So, of course, I said, because I'm British and I am a gentleman, I said, I'd love to read them. Well, we had a lovely talk, and then I sat and began to read, and I was absolutely astonished because I realized that I was in the presence of a great mystical poet, somebody who'd found a totally modern language for ancient truths, for ancient passions. And the next week, I had Dorothy in, and I said, Dorothy, these are astounding. You have to continue writing. I beg you, and you must publish these poems. They're absolutely unique. They're totally original. They have a completely authentic voice, and there isn't a false note in them. They're amazing. I love you. And that began our incredible friendship because
Mm.
she'd never shown her poems to anybody. And it took her enormous courage, I think, to show them to me. And I'm so honored that I was the first person really to see her and to recognize her, because then I did everything I possibly could to get her work out. And we became the dearest and most passionate and tender of friends. She was one of my greatest friends in life. I honored her. I loved her. I learned enormously from her because she was immensely wise. Her own very deep, very long Kundalini experience, which lasted basically from about 50 to her death at 93 and became ever subtler, ever more sensitive, made her a touchstone for me. So whatever I did in the world and whatever I wrote, Dorothy's was the one voice I really cared about hearing because I knew she knew. So we had a friendship on every conceivable level of the deepest kind.
That's beautiful. And you referred to her as a mystic poet.
Oh,
And I
yes.
think that is such a perfect description.
Yes.
And you, of course, having translated Rumi and writing poetry yourself,
Here,
of course.
Hadovich and Angelus Silesius. I've done a lot of translation of major mystical poets because part of the adventure that I've been on is to bring back those tremendous ancient voices that are specifically relevant to what we're going through, this horrific evolutionary crisis that we're going through right
Mm.
now.
I
Dorothy
and I think
was a mystical
yes.
poet,
Mhm.
yes.
And so tell us, because when I hear mystical poet, I think of a poet who is writing from the experience of divinity,
Yes.
from true union. And I would love to hear you speak about what is it that characterizes a mystical poet?
Characterized as a mystical poet is an absolute absorption in inmost divine experience and a passion to try and convey its fragrance, its aroma. Mystical poets know that the actual experience of divine union is beyond words. It goes so far beyond names and forms because it's so intimate and because it's so extraordinary and because it's so passionate, because it's so extreme. But they also know that if they can steep in that experience, like a tea bag in water, soon through divine grace, they'll be given the words that will help others who've had similar experiences really remember and really renew their inmost connection with God. So a mystical poet is somebody who's trying to do consciously the impossible, convey the intimate intensity of union with the divine, and does so bringing their full personality, their full richness, everything they've ever understood about life, everything they've ever understood about language, to attempt to convey what the glory of real inner experience is.
And I love that you use the word remember, because I think as the further I've traveled on the path, the more I realize that the discovery of the ineffable is a remembering that
Yes,
these truths
yes.
are embedded in the sort of ancient history of at least humanity and maybe the planet itself. And there's a remembering process that we're in that's bringing us into contact with who we really are. And I would love you to say a little
Absolutely.
bit about that.
Well, I think it's simple, actually. I think that we're born with the original blessing of divine consciousness. That blessing is shrouded by convention, by society, by this fanatical belief only in reason and in science. And we've, as a culture and as a civilization, lost that connection. But there are hundreds of millions of people waking up right now to the need to reestablish that connection because the world's going terminally insane. It's filled with violence and craziness. And many people understand that the getting back to the mystical connection is able to give us the fuel to stay steady, sane, alive, joyful through absolute horror and chaos, which is now bursting out everywhere. So I
Yes.
think that what you call remembering is perhaps even more than remembering, it's connecting with the essential part of our nature, which has been kept from us for so long. And when we do read great mystical poetry with an open heart, suddenly you find yourself truly remembering experiences in which you felt like that, experiences of loving another human being, experiences of being in ecstasy at music. My passion is music, and whenever I read Dorothy, I often think about Bach, the kind of deep, sacred peace and stability that I felt with Bach. You may remember experiences where you've been overwhelmed by the majesty and the beauty of nature. And what mystical poetry does help you to do is to recognize those experiences, not just as chaotic, random experiences, but as signs of this tremendous awareness in you as a gift that is longing to be born and expanded and become, in the deepest sense, normal to you, the core of your life, instead of just a few gifted experiences. So that's how I
Yes.
feel.
And so, Dorothy is such a beautiful example of a mystic poet.
She's the greatest American mystical poet, and one day that will be recognized.
I didn't have a chance to meet her in person until she was, I think, 91 years old. And
Uh,
I spent an afternoon with her. What was so amazing about her was at 91, and her health was not, it was failing, and yet
right.
she vibrated with a kind of passion for life and
Yes. Oh,
joyfulness.
yes.
Uh, and
Yes.
and being with her, I think we were both resonating together in a mutual recognition of just the wonder of Kundalini and the wonder of life. And it was just so inspiring to see someone at such an advanced age being so fully alive and so innocent and open and excited about possibility, which feels completely like the antidote to the world needs today, is that kind of
Very much so.
vivacious love of life. And would you say that that quality is that is that can be found in all the mystic poets, that love
Well,
of
there are
life?
some that are very stark and fierce and ferocious, like Kabir,
Mm,
and there are others like Rumi who are overflowing with ecstasy and joy. I think Dorothy actually had both sides, because there are poems of Dorothy's which are in absolutely shameless in their confrontation of the agony and the intense multiple deaths that go into an authentic mystical growth. But there was also an endless supply through her very deep Kundalini experience of profound joy, which wasn't simply in her consciousness, but was actually in her body. Her
yes.
body was being transfigured. Her body was being constantly remade by these soft, pulsing, radiant, blissful Kundalini energies. And that gave her an extraordinary hope that this crisis, terrible though it was also potentially the birth canal of a new humanity that would be irrigated by these energies and able, through joy and through creativity, awoken by these energies, to co create with God a wholly new way of being and doing everything. And that's very much been the theme of my work, which is one of the many reasons why Dorothy and I were so clear, because we were both experiencing this radiance in our own inmost experience. I was talking about it in all of my books and trying to help people to get with this birthing process in the middle of this death. And Dorothy was living it in the most exquisite way and writing her extraordinary books, poems, but also her extraordinary books about the Kundalini process, which her book, The Kundalini, is by far the best book written on the Kundalini because it comes from 40 years of the most intricate, subtle, clear minded experience of this great evolutionary force that is erupting in hundreds of thousands of people beyond the control of the religions at this moment. And we made, as you
Yes.
know, many videos about the process, which are on YouTube, which if anybody listening would like to go and see, you'll see this extraordinary woman speaking so simply out of this immensely complex experience. And that kind of simplicity that Dorothy had is truly the mark of mastery. She was a master, but she was a humble, loving, tender master. And in that, she, I think, touched hundreds of lives. Just to be in Dorothy's presence was to be touched by truth at a very deep. She's an unforgettable person, and I don't feel she's dead at all. I know she's not on the body, but Dorothy's presence is right here, right now, because of the depth of the love that we shared. When you share that kind of love, death is not an end. It's a beginning of a deeper kind of relationship, which goes very inward. And she's been with
Yes.
me and will always be with me.
Beautiful. Now, there's one poem of hers that I intend to include. There's a few that I will include in the article, but
Please
one in
read them. I
particular,
would
I
love it.
wanted to, I would love to read it to you, and I would love to hear any comment it evokes from you. It's from this collection called the Kundalini Poems. It's called The
Mm.
Solitary Ecstatic, and it goes, "Don't surrender your loneliness so quickly, Hafiz. Hafiz, do you know what it is to be totally, utterly alone? To be visited again and again by those elements that some call God, and still no friend to share with, tell what is happening, no one near to hear your story, extend a welcoming hand. Sometimes even God is not enough. Sometimes the loneliness and something called rapture are all you have."
Well, that's an amazing poem. And I think all authentic mystics recognize the truth of it, that one of the subtle agonies of the mystical path is how difficult it is to convey to those who have no idea about it, who've never experienced it. And perhaps the other agony, too, is something that Dorothy experienced a lot in her life because she was an exceptionally loving person who never truly found the beloved in a human form. And I think that was an ache that occupied many of her years, but an ache that she understood how to overcome and to accept as the sacrifice for the great realization she'd been given, and also was perhaps behind the intensity of her longing to create poetry, because it was as if all the poetry was written to the imaginary human beloved, and that Dorothy's poetry makes you that beloved. There's a great paradox at the core of that poem, because in acknowledging the extreme solitude that belongs to the authentic mystical path, which you have to accept, because in the end, it's you alone meeting the alone. And in our culture, there are so few people who have authentically woken up to the real mystical truth of reality. In acknowledging that, she's also sharing with all the others who are experiencing that. So drawing them into a community of solitary lovers and in some way easing that solitude, because you recognize not only that it's the price of mystical awakening, but that there are many people all over the world whom you'll never meet, but who know the same thing as you do, and your heart fills with compassion for them. But that first lines from Hafiz, don't surrender your loneliness too quickly, is a very powerful and very profound line, because our culture is a culture of distraction, a culture that endlessly tries to lure you away from your pain of a yearning for fulfillment in union. And if you allow it to distract you, you'll miss the supreme experience of your life, the recognition that you are one with the one. And that's where the rapture in the last line comes from, the rapture that is the reward of all of that suffering and solitude that redeems it, transfigures it, and initiates you into a relationship with the beloved that doesn't end your human solitude, but gives you such a vast awareness of all the relationships that that solitude can link you to, the relationship to the creation, the relationship to the rain, the relationship to the faces that you see in their divine beauty on the tramway, anything. It's all God. And the tragedy of being alone becomes the ecstasy of being alone with the alone in rapture. And that is, for so many people, the real truth of the mystical journey.
That is incredibly well said. And I also love that you're connecting your life's work to Dorothy's life's work, which I
Oh,
think
yes.
creates an opportunity for us to say a little bit about your most recent book, The Magdalene Revolution,
Thank you. I'd love that.
because I feel that, so in my reading of, I started on a journey with Mary Magdalene about a decade ago. When
Really? How
I
did you start?
well, I was raised Catholic, so Mary Magdalene was always a figure I was
Yes, she's always there. Yeah,
fascinated by. And then I loved the book The Cloud of Unknowing, and she's
it has a
mentioned,
wonderful section. Yes, very beautifully, very profoundly in that book. Yes.
and then I write novels occasionally, and I
Oh
wrote a
gosh.
novel, and I wrote Mary Magdalene into the novel, and particularly the novel centers on, there was the time in which Mary was the first to see the resurrected Jesus,
Of
and then
course. Yes.
but there's this interesting time period between Jesus leaving her before she sees the apostles. And so I was
Yes.
speculating as to what she was thinking during that time, when she was literally the only person on earth who knew, uh,
Who'd seen him? Yes.
and who had seen him, and so that just cascaded into a fascination with Mary Magdalene. And so, reading your book recently, I had just happened to see it. I was looking for information about you online, and I saw the book, so I bought a copy.
Thank you.
And I feel that it's so it so relates to my own journey in that, and connects me to you, to Dorothy, in that when she helped me understand that Kundalini was the source of my was the fuel and guidance of my awakening, I started to feel a feminine presence of awakened
Yes.
energy
Yes.
that was within me, that had
Yes.
been guiding my journey. And that's become much more prominent over the last few years, that
Oh,
this
wonderful.
ongoing sense of connection to a divine feminine presence. So I read your book of Mary Magdalene, and I just resonated so deeply with the way that you are expressing the divine feminine and how it is reemerging or wanting to reemerge in culture. You were just saying how our world distracts us, sometimes it feels like our world was designed to distract us
Oh,
from.
completely. Yes. Because the last thing the people in power want us to discover is our divine identity, let alone the process of divinization that the divine feminine makes possible.
That's
They
right.
want us slaves to their madness. Yes.
Yes. So can you tell us a little about your own recognition of Mary Magdalene, as a harbinger of a completely different spiritual opportunity for humanity?
It's a wonderful question. I was brought up an Anglican and I had a treble voice and I used to sing in church and I can never forget a wonderful stained glass window of Mary Magdalene in the garden, opening her arms to Jesus. And I think as a child, with my heart open through singing, I realized there was something absolutely extraordinary in this relationship between this young, glorious God man and this equally glorious, loving woman. I didn't know what it was, but I think that relationship went very deep into my heart and my soul. And then I became very passionate about the divine feminine. As you know, a lot of my work has been devoted to the divine feminine. I had a feminine guru who turned out not to be a real guru, but loving her as the divine mother opened up an enormous experience of the embodied feminine for me and in me. And then I started to read the Gnostic Gospels, in which Mary Magdalene was presented very differently from the Gospels that we have, because in those Gospels, it's quite clear that she was something far more even than the beloved disciple. She was Jesus' koinonios, the Gospel of Philip says. So that means consort. And that began to open me to what my book is really the culmination of, which is that they came together. They were married. They were deeply in love. Their love was the basis of his mission. And she came to help him give birth to the new creation by saturating him with her glorious feminine power, grounding his whole incarnation in the world. And about 20 years ago, I went on a pilgrimage. I led a pilgrimage to the south of France. And we went to the Magdalene world. And I went to the cave of St. Baume, where she's said to have spent the last 30 years of her life. And I went in, and this tremendous peace descended upon me, and I felt her presence. And I came out and I read the Catholic Church's description of what she'd been up to in that cave. And basically, they said she was penitent for her life and longing to die and praying to be released and all. And I wanted to scream, because that's clearly not what was going on in that cave. And I felt outraged. And I was walking back down the valley, and I turned to look at the cave. And for about a minute, I saw her as this tremendous blazing tower of golden light, radiating golden light throughout the entire creation. And I had no idea what to do with such an overwhelming vision. But I knew that what I was seeing was something essential to the authentic Christ consciousness, that she was far more than consort even. She was the representative, the incarnation of the divine feminine, destined to be one with his incarnation of the sacred masculine, to incarnate the glory of the sacred marriage on the earth, the marriage of transcendence and immanence, which is the source of all evolutionary transformation. I had that vision, and for 20 years, I was doing many other things. I wrote many other books. I had to launch sacred activism. I was finishing all the different aspects of my work, but I couldn't turn away from that vision. So at last, in my late 60s, I decided that I might be ready at last to do this work. But quite honestly, it was the most difficult and most painful book of my entire life, because it took everything that I'd ever learned, everything that I'd ever taught, to be able to write it. And I was led by her from revelation to revelation to revelation, but it meant being silent and being shattered again and again and praying and waiting. But in the end, through her grace, all the pieces did come together. So I see this book not as a book. It's not for me a book. It's a sacred text that I have been entrusted with to give to humanity at this moment. Because the key to our potential transformation, the key to our use of this horrific death process that we're in, is to reclaim the most glorious possible vision of who we really are that we could possibly have been given. And the glorious vision that the authentic Christ consciousness offers us is the vision of the sacred marriage, a vision of the utter unity of the highest transcendence with every single detail of human life, and the vision of a divinized sexuality that unifies us, body and soul, heart and mind, in such a way that we're no longer condemned to live split, to live in fragments, but to live as a unified, holy, humble, majestic human being directly plugged into the evolutionary energies of the universe. We're living in a culture that has become a wasteland created by a demented masculine that is in total dissociation from the feminine. But if you bring together the best of the masculine, the most luminous, the most clear, the most ordered of the masculine, with the most luscious and passionate and tender and vibrant and body loving and sex transforming powers of the feminine, then you have a unity of potential lived human divine experience. You have the birthing force of a wholly new race. And this is what I believe that Jesus and Mary came to give us, but they couldn't give all of it because she was written out and treated as a prostitute, and her whole presence was dimmed and in some cases degraded and desecrated. So the work that I tried to do in her honor was to bring fullness of the divine feminine and unify it with the fullness of the divine masculine in him, and show that all of the great journey of Christ consciousness is really a journey of that birthing force that now we are invited to incarnate, because if we don't, we simply will not survive. Humanity will not go. So it comes at
That's
this moment when it's most necessary, I hope.
I I think that is very true. Now, I would like to ask you a more personal question in that very recently I had a powerful experience of uh, connecting with and confronting a feminine goddess who felt as ancient as the earth and who continues to be with me over the last, really, we're talking weeks now. And I got, I have come to realize that she entered my life in that Kundalini experience 25 years ago, and
Yes.
that Dorothy was helping to prepare me for her a more full union with her. My love of Teresa of Avila was helping to prepare me. Uh, my fascination with Mary Magdalene was helping to prepare me. Uh, and the message I received was that the everything you create from this point on needs to be built on the foundation of the inner goddess. And that's so reminiscent of Dorothy's poetry, so reminiscent of everything you're saying about Mary Magdalene. And I guess what I'm seeing is there's a feminine spirit, a feminine essence that wants to be reborn in human
Oh,
culture.
she is being reborn. She's
She is being
so
reborn.
she is forcing her way through because she has to be reborn now for humanity to have a ghost of a chance of surviving the madness it's created out of its dissociation and lunacy. But she is also being reborn through that lunacy, because that lunacy created a dark night in which people now aren't just having lovely thoughts about the feminine. They're realizing that without the restoration of the full majesty, power, beauty, grandeur, passion, force of the Kundalini, of the life force at its most divine, humanity won't get through. So that's the exact moment when feminine can return. She can return when she's most yearned for, most longed for, most needed, most agonized about. And
Mm,
that's what's happening. Don't you feel it?
absolutely. Yes, yes. And I think, when I was with Dorothy, when I read her poems, I feel the vibration of that energy. Uh, she told me,
Yes.
at 91 years old, she still was doing a daily practice of ecstatic dance, uh, where she would just let that energy flow through her. I mean, her
Yes.
movement wasn't what it was 30 years earlier, but she still was just allowing herself to be taken by the ecstasy of that
Oh, yes.
energy. And
Well,
I
she
would
used to
love,
say to me that it would just by sometimes just by moving her hand, she would feel great bliss because the energies were so soaked in her. Dorothy was one of the first people to be born in the next level of divine humanity. That is, I believe, the goal of this whole process. So, Dorothy, in a way, is a sign of what happens when you allow the divine feminine to take you over, to possess you, to work you, to initiate you progressively, then that you do become irrigated by these amazing energies. You do have access to a wholly new level of energy. You do become a living, walking hope in your own being. So, in a
and
sense,
so
I've always thought of Dorothy as a kind of sign that the vision that I and other evolutionary mystics have of this crisis being an immense crisis of death, but also a birthing crisis of a new divine human is real. I
mm,
met it in her.
mm,
She was alive with that reality. And what made her so special, I think, is that she was so uninflated. Her experience was so deep that she was humble and that she wasn't proclaiming herself as anything. She knew that she was a masterpiece of Madame Kundalini, but she gave all the credit to the goddess because she knew
mm.
that in many, many ways she didn't exist. She was a a wave arising in the returning sea of the divine feminine.
Mm. That's wonderful. And so you would definitely say, it sounds like, that Dorothy was an example of the same energy that Mary Magdalene is
Oh,
wanting to
yes, there's
bring into
only
the
one
earth.
goddess, many names. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay.
And Dorothy was a tantric too. I mean, Dorothy had a deep commitment to personal love. She'd loved very deeply and passionately and sexually in her life. It hadn't always gone well. She'd been betrayed and she'd felt abandoned, but she'd known that union of flesh and spirit that tantric sexuality can give you access to. So she knew all the different aspects of the return of the feminine. She'd lived them, but most especially, she'd consecrated herself to really refining and understanding the Kundalini energies because she recognized the Kundalini as the direct initiatory birthing force of the divine mother of a new humanity. She knew that was possible because it was happening to her. And those of us who knew her and who had had similar experiences ourselves was so honored to meet her and see how what a beautiful being was created through that kind of experience. And that's, I think, perhaps Dorothy's greatest contribution to all of us.
That is beautiful. And so one last question for you. If people are experiencing this awakening of the goddess in their own life, what do you
Yeah.
suggest? How do you encourage them? What do you suggest they do to uh, participate more fully in the birthing process that's already begun?
Well, the first thing I would urge them to do is to read Dorothy's work because there is no greater guide to this birthing process than Dorothy, for the very simple reason that it was so deep in her, but also that she had the gift of simplicity. If you have an open heart and you're beginning to experience these experiences, get with her poetry and get with her extraordinary book on the Kundalini, and you'll have the best inspiration and the best tools that you could ever imagine. You need them because these experiences are sometimes very bewildering, and it's very important to realize that they do have a meaning and that there are ways of accommodating them, relaxing into them, accepting in them, finding the courage to be totally transformed by them. That's the first thing. The second thing is that you have to, once they start these birthing energies, you do need to have a serious mystical practice. Otherwise, they can truly derange you. And you don't have to be complicated about it. In fact, it's much better if you're simple. So I would suggest to anybody going through this birthing process that they find an image of the mother that they love and they relate to. Maybe it's Mary Magdalene, maybe it's Mary, maybe it's Kali, maybe it's Durga, and really start being devoted by saying the name of God in the core of their heart and really doing serious practice of remembrance of their essential identity so that the mirror of the heart can become increasingly clear and reality can start revealing its sacred divine magic to them. And the third thing is to really honor and love the body. Really try and save yourself, redeem yourself from all the terrible messages the patriarchal religion have told you about your body being the root of illusion and sexuality being sinful, and honor your body as the living temple of the spirit by feeding it, by exercising it, by dancing, by expressing yourself through and in the body with delight and deep love. If you do those three things, you become, in a sense, under the Kundalini, a midwife of your own birthing process.
Andrew, I really want to thank you for
Well,
speaking with me today. It's been beyond a
grateful
delight.
to me. And you
Uh,
too, and bless your whole journey and bless your work of bringing Dorothy back to us. I think Dorothy's great recognition is about to come. I wish she'd
mm,
lived to see it, but she can see it now. She's dancing with Kabir and Rumi, free from all the infirmities of old age. And those of us who knew her will always remember her as one of the most astonishing beings, astonishingly gifted in every way that we ever met. And I'm so
mm.
thrilled that you had the opportunity to be touched by her. And I'm so thrilled that you're bringing back her work so that many more thousands of people can taste the wonders that we were privileged to taste.
Andrew, thank you so much. So much love to you and
And love back to
appreciation.
you, my friend. And love for your work and love for your evolutionary journey. May you be born fully and create as much radioactive mischief as you can.
Thank you so much. Much love to you, sir. Thank you.